In the glow of streetlights, a black Supreme Court judge faced two white officers, having fun at his expense. Their mockery wasn't just abuse, it was the system's cruelty. But they didn't know he had the power to destroy them with a single gavel strike. What happened next shocked everyone. Let's start at the beginning. The quiet charm of downtown Charleston was on full display that evening. The air was warm, carrying a faint scent of jasmine from the nearby gardens, while the streets hummed softly with the distant murmur of restaurants and the occasional honk of a car horn. Judge Desmond Carter, a commanding figure with graying hair at his temples and a meticulously maintained mustache, emerged from a stately hall where he had delivered an impassioned speech on the dire need for systemic reform in America's justice system. His tailored navy blue suit fit perfectly, accentuating his broad shoulders and dignified posture. In one hand, he carried a polished leather briefcase, in the other, a folded speech with notes scribbled in the margins. He made his way to the parking lot, his Italian leather shoes tapping lightly against the pavement. The lot was dimly lit, with only a few flickering streetlights casting pools of yellow over the rows of parked cars. His black Mercedes-Benz, gleaming even in the low light, sat a few rows away, a symbol of his hard-earned success. Carter's mind was preoccupied with the evening's discussions, important conversations about justice and equality that he hoped had resonated with the attendees. As he approached his car, the sharp flash of red and blue lights broke the stillness. A patrol car rolled slowly into the lot, its engine growling low like a predator eyeing its prey. Carter paused, narrowing his eyes as the vehicle stopped just a few feet away, blocking his path to his car. The doors swung open, and two white officers stepped out with unsettling grins plastered across their faces. The taller of the two, Murphy, adjusted his belt as he approached, his hand resting conspicuously near his holstered gun. His partner, O'Connor, followed a step behind, his expression smug and eyes glinting with something that resembled cruel amusement. "Evening, sir," Murphy said, his tone dripping with mock politeness. He moved to stand directly in Carter's path. "Mind stepping aside for a minute?" Judge Carter, unfazed, straightened his posture and met the officer's gaze. His baritone voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Is there a problem, officers?" His question was measured, devoid of fear, but carrying an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. Murphy tilted his head, a thin smirk curling at the corner of his lips. "Nah, just routine," he said casually, though his body language told a different story. He gestured toward the Mercedes with a jerk of his chin. "Nice ride. You don't see many folks like you driving these. Care to explain where you got it?" The insinuation was clear. Carter's sharp mind immediately picked up on the coded language, the unspoken accusation. He adjusted the strap of his briefcase and said evenly, "I don't believe I need to explain myself for owning a vehicle, Officer Murphy. If there's an actual concern, I'd suggest you state it directly." O'Connor chuckled, stepping closer to lean on the car's hood as if it belonged to him. "Relax, man. Just doing our job," he said, his tone condescending. "Mind showing us some ID? You know, to clear up any misunderstandings?" Carter calmly retrieved his wallet, handing over his ID without a word. He had dealt with situations like this before and knew better than to escalate. As Murphy glanced at the card, his expression didn't shift. Instead, he tossed the ID back with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Thanks," he said flatly, clearly unimpressed by the credentials of the Honorable Desmond Carter, judge of the South Carolina Supreme Court. The officers made no effort to leave, their postures relaxed yet deliberately obstructive. It was clear this wasn't about protocol or safety. They were enjoying themselves, savoring the power they held in that moment. By now, the scene had begun to attract attention. A couple walking past paused, their phones raised to record. A few onlookers across the street stopped mid-conversation, craning their necks to see what was happening. Carter noticed the growing crowd, his eyes flicking briefly to a young man live-streaming the encounter on social media. Though the officers seemed oblivious, too caught up in their game, Carter's mind was already racing. These witnesses, and their phones, could turn this situation into something much larger. "Officers," Carter said, his voice steady but carrying a sharp edge. "I strongly suggest you verify my credentials properly and reconsider your actions. You are making a significant mistake." Murphy smirked, unbothered. "Oh, is that right? And what mistake would that be?" Carter held his gaze, unflinching. The tension in the air thickened, the quiet hum of the parking lot now laced with the faint sound of murmuring from the growing crowd. Little did the officers know, they weren't just dealing with another black man they could intimidate. They were standing in the presence of a man who had the power and the will to ensure their actions would not go unpunished. As the officers continued their inspection, Judge Desmond Carter stood tall, his expression calm, but his eyes blazing with quiet indignation. He watched as Murphy ran his hand along the sleek lines of the car, pretending to inspect it while muttering something inaudible to O'Connor. The deliberate theatrics were insulting, and Carter knew they were designed to provoke him. Still, he held his composure, speaking in the measured tone of someone who knew the law better than most. "Gentlemen," he said firmly, "this is profiling. I am not obligated to endure this harassment under any circumstance. Your actions are not only unprofessional, but also unlawful." O'Connor, leaning casually on the hood of the Mercedes, smirked and tilted his head toward Carter. "Harassment?" he mocked, his voice dripping with feigned innocence. "We're just doing our job, old man. You sure you're not overreacting? Maybe you've got something to hide, huh?" His grin widened, and Murphy chuckled in agreement. Before Carter could respond, the faint sound of footsteps echoed behind him, followed by a sharp voice. "Hey, why are you harassing him?" The voice belonged to a young black man in his early 20s, his phone raised, capturing every second of the interaction. He wore a hoodie and jeans, his face a mix of anger and defiance. The officers turned their attention to the newcomer, their expressions darkening. Murphy took a step forward, his hand once again hovering near his holstered weapon. "Step back!" he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the rising tension. "Unless you want to join him!" The young man didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his phone's angle to ensure both officers were fully in frame. "Nah, I'm good right here. The whole internet's watching now," he replied, his voice steady despite the obvious risk he was taking. The livestream's comments section was already filling up with outrage as viewers tuned in, sharing the video widely. Judge Carter turned slightly toward the young man, giving him a brief but meaningful nod. Then, focusing back on the officers, he seized the moment. His voice was calm yet commanding, cutting through the chaos like a gavel striking a bench. "Gentlemen," he said, his words precise and deliberate, "I strongly suggest you verify my identity. You're making a grave error that will cost you dearly, both personally and professionally." Murphy laughed, a sound devoid of humor, while O'Connor shrugged dismissively. "Grave error? Please, what are you gonna do, lecture us to death?" Murphy sneered. But Carter didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he adjusted his posture, his presence exuding the quiet authority that had defined his career. He let their ignorance hang in the air, knowing they had no idea who they were dealing with, or the storm that was already brewing online. The crowd, now a mix of concerned passers-by and avid livestream viewers, murmured in growing unrest. Someone in the back called out, "Leave him alone!" Another added, "We see you. This is wrong." The officers glanced uneasily at the gathering, their bravado beginning to waver under the weight of public scrutiny. Murphy and O'Connor were too entrenched in their own arrogance to realize it, but their time was running out. As the standoff continued, a senior police official arrived, having been alerted by someone witnessing the live stream. Captain Laura Bennett, a no-nonsense black woman with a formidable reputation, pushed through the crowd. "What the hell is going on here, Murphy?" "O'Connor?" she barked, scanning the scene. The officers stammered, trying to justify their actions. Judge Carter handed over his ID card, and Captain Bennett's face darkened as she read the name. Honorable Judge Desmond Carter of the South Carolina Supreme Court. "Are you out of your minds?" she roared. "Do you have any idea who this is? Judge Carter presides over cases involving police misconduct." The officers paled, realizing their careers were on the line. The incident went viral, making national headlines by morning. Judge Carter, though furious, chose to use the experience as a teaching moment. He filed a formal complaint and worked with advocacy groups to highlight racial profiling in law enforcement. Murphy and O'Connor faced suspension pending an internal investigation. Under mounting public pressure, their superiors expedited new training programs emphasizing racial sensitivity. Meanwhile, Judge Carter used his courtroom and platform to champion reforms, his ordeal serving as undeniable proof of the need for change. In an ironic twist, months later, Murphy and O'Connor appeared in Carter's courtroom as defendants in a civil rights lawsuit. The judge's measured words during the trial resonated deeply. Justice is not about power, it's about accountability. This story left the nation questioning its deeply rooted biases while inspiring a movement for systemic change.